Most people pray for money, but they never change the language that governs their finances. And here's the truth. Heaven responds to words, not wishes. This psalm is not poetry. It's a financial instrument. When spoken daily, it realigns your mindset, your faith, and your expectations with God's system of provision. You don't activate breakthroughs by chasing money. You activate them by speaking truth until heaven recognizes your voice. Every time you declare this psalm, you are breaking agreements with lack, debt, and delay. You're telling your finances who their source really is. God does not reward need. He rewards faith in motion, and faith always has a sound. If you're tired of praying emotional prayers with no results, this is your moment. Speak this psalm daily, not hoping but knowing, and watch God move in ways your logic cannot explain. Most people don't realize that money doesn't respond to emotion, it responds to alignment, and alignment always begins with words. Everything God created, He created with speech. He didn't hustle light into existence. He didn't negotiate with darkness. He spoke, and what He said became what was seen. That same spiritual law is still working today, and it's working whether you understand it or not. Your words are not decoration. They are direction. They are spiritual currency. And whatever you keep spending them on is what your life keeps buying. Every day, people unknowingly cancel their own financial breakthroughs with their mouths. They wake up saying things like, money is hard to come by, or I'll always struggle, or that's just how life is. They think they're being realistic, but in reality, they're being prophetic in the wrong direction, because words don't just describe your situation, they program your expectations. And expectations shape decisions. Decisions shape habits. Habits shape outcomes. Long before poverty shows up in your bank account, it shows up in your vocabulary. This is why speaking the psalm daily matters. Not reading it silently, not skimming past it emotionally, speaking it. Because sound is how faith travels. Faith doesn't grow in silence. Faith grows when truth is heard, even when it's coming from your own mouth. When you declare God's word, you're not trying to convince Him. You're training yourself to agree with Him, and agreement is where power flows. See, God's economy doesn't respond to need, it responds to faith, and faith always has a voice. The psalm gives you heaven's language concerning provision, protection, and supply. When you speak it daily, you're withdrawing truth from a spiritual account that never runs dry. You're making deposits into your mindset that compound over time. And just like money grows through consistency, so does revelation. Some people want a financial miracle without changing their confession, but miracles don't violate principles, they fulfill them. If your words are constantly reinforcing lack, fear, and scarcity, then you're planting seeds that can only grow one kind of harvest. But when you speak God's word, you change the seed. And when the seed changes, the harvest has no choice but to follow. This psalm doesn't beg God for money, it establishes authority. It reminds you who your source is. Money is not your provider. Your job is not your provider. Your clients are not your provider. God is your source, and everything else is just a channel. Channels can dry up, but the source never does. When you speak this psalm, you're disconnecting your faith from unstable systems and reconnecting it to an unshakable kingdom. And here's something most people miss. What you speak repeatedly, you eventually believe automatically. At first, it may feel like you're just reading words, but keep saying it. Keep declaring it, because revelation comes after repetition. One day you won't be saying the psalm by effort, you'll be saying it by conviction. And when conviction shows up, confidence follows. When confidence follows, action changes. And when action changes, results change. This is why daily declaration creates momentum, not hype. Momentum. Momentum is quiet, steady, and unstoppable. You're not shouting at money, you're aligning your spirit with abundance. You're retraining your subconscious to expect provision instead of shortage. You're replacing survival thinking with stewardship thinking. And God always trusts more to people who think like owners, not victims. So every time you speak this psalm, you are making a withdrawal from fear and a deposit into faith. You are breaking old agreements with limitation and signing new ones with promise. You are telling your future what it is allowed to look like. And heaven listens closely to people who speak with consistency, not desperation. Because when your words line up with his word, lack has no legal right to stay. Most people underestimate the power of repetition because they confuse it with routine. They think if they've heard something once, they've mastered it. But hearing is not the same as understanding, and understanding is not the same as believing. Revelation doesn't arrive in a moment, it arrives through movement. And repetition is the movement that carries truth from your head into your spirit. That's why saying the psalm daily is not a religious exercise, it's a strategy. When you repeat God's word, you're not informing God of anything he doesn't already know. You're allowing his truth to overwrite the internal scripts you've been running for years. Every person lives by a script. Some people are living by scripts of limitation, passed down through family, culture, or past failure. And until those scripts are rewritten, results remain the same. Repetition is how rewriting happens. Think about it. You didn't learn to doubt money overnight. You learned it through repeated experiences, repeated conversations, repeated disappointments. Scarcity became familiar because it was frequent. So when God introduces abundance, your mind resists it, not because it's untrue, but because it's unfamiliar. Repetition removes resistance. The more you say the psalm, the less foreign provision feels. Eventually, abundance stops sounding like a theory and starts feeling like a responsibility. This is how faith is built. Faith grows the same way muscles grow, through consistent, intentional stress in the right direction. One declaration doesn't transform a mindset, but daily declarations begin to reshape the way you see, think, and decide. Over time, something shifts. You start expecting God to move. You start looking for opportunity instead of obstacles. You start acting from trust instead of fear. And all of that begins with repetition. Repetition also trains your emotions. Emotions are powerful, but they are terrible leaders. If you let your feelings decide what you speak, you will only speak faith when you feel good. But faith is not emotional, it's directional. When you speak the psalm daily, especially on days when finances look tight, you are teaching your emotions to follow truth instead of circumstances. And once your emotions fall in line, your actions become consistent. Many people quit too early because they expect immediate results. They say the psalm for a few days, maybe a week, and when nothing changes externally, they stop. But what they don't realize is that the most important change happens internally first. God often changes your perception before he changes your position. He shifts your thinking before he shifts your resources. Repetition keeps you in the process long enough for the internal shift to take place. And here's the key. Belief always precedes manifestation. You will never sustain what you don't believe you deserve. Repetition installs belief quietly, subtly, but permanently. One day you'll notice that fear doesn't hit the same way it used to. Anxiety loses its grip. Desperation fades. Not because money suddenly appeared, but because faith took root. And when faith takes root, provision follows. This is also why repetition produces confidence. Confidence is simply familiarity with truth. The more familiar you become with God's promises, the less intimidated you are by financial challenges. Problems don't disappear, but they lose their authority. Bills stop feeling like threats and start feeling like assignments. Debt stops feeling like a sentence and starts feeling temporary. And all of that comes from repeated exposure to truth. Repetition doesn't make God move faster, it makes you ready. It prepares you to recognize opportunity when it shows up. It aligns your decisions with divine timing. It positions you to steward increase when it arrives. God will not release what would crush your character or confuse your priorities. Repetition matures your mindset so you can carry what you've been praying for. So don't rush the process. Don't underestimate the daily declaration. Every time you speak that psalm, you are layering truth upon truth, building a foundation that cannot be shaken. You are becoming someone who believes before they see and trusts before they touch. And when belief becomes your default, breakthrough becomes inevitable. One of the greatest obstacles to financial breakthrough is not lack, it's anxiety. Anxiety disguises itself as responsibility, but it's really a lack of trust dressed up as concern. People say they're just being cautious, but what they're really doing is trying to control outcomes that belong to God, and control is the opposite of faith. God does not respond to panic, He responds to alignment. When your heart, your words, and your actions line up with His principles, provision flows without strain. Anxiety makes people rush. It makes them grab opportunities they didn't pray about, say yes to things they weren't assigned to, and compromise values just to feel secure. But security that comes from shortcuts is always temporary. God's system works differently. He doesn't bless desperation, He blesses obedience. And obedience requires stillness. It requires trust. It requires the confidence to say, I don't see it yet, but I know the source. This is why speaking the psalm daily matters so much. The psalm recalibrates your inner world. It quiets the noise of fear and reminds your soul who's actually in charge. Because when fear is loud, wisdom goes silent. Anxiety clouds judgment. It causes people to confuse activity with progress. But alignment brings clarity, and clarity produces calm even before circumstances change. God is not moved by financial stress. He's not impressed by sleepless nights. He's not persuaded by worry-filled prayers. He is moved by faith expressed through trust. And trust shows up in how you speak when things aren't working yet. Anyone can praise when the account is full. Faith speaks when the numbers don't make sense. That's alignment. When you declare the psalm instead of rehearsing your fears, you're making a powerful decision. You're choosing truth over tension. You're saying, I will not let my circumstances dictate my confession. And that decision opens the door for divine involvement, because God partners with people who make room for Him, not people who try to replace Him with worry. Anxiety also creates tunnel vision. It keeps you focused on what's missing instead of what's possible. Alignment expands perspective. It allows you to see opportunity where others see obstacles. It helps you recognize doors God is opening instead of obsessing over the ones that closed. When you're aligned, you don't chase provision. You attract it by walking in order. And here's the truth most people overlook. Anxiety is exhausting, but it produces nothing. Faith, on the other hand, produces peace, and peace is productive. Peace allows you to think clearly. It sharpens your discernment. It keeps you from making emotional, financial decisions that cost you later. God's guidance flows most freely in an atmosphere of peace, not pressure. When your finances are submitted to God's will, your soul no longer has to carry the weight of provision. That weight belongs to Him. Your role is stewardship, not stress. And stewardship starts with trust. Trust that God sees what you need. Trust that He understands timing better than you do. Trust that delay is not denial, it's often preparation. The psalm reminds you of that. Every declaration pulls your focus off anxiety and places it back on alignment. It trains you to respond instead of react, to listen instead of panic, to wait instead of force. And waiting, when done in faith, is not passive, it's powerful. It positions you exactly where God can bless you without harming you. Alignment doesn't mean you stop working. It means you stop worrying. It means you do your part diligently while trusting God completely. It means you plant, water, and expect increase without digging up the seed every day to see if it's growing. Anxiety digs up seeds. Faith waters them. So when fear tries to dominate your thoughts, speak the psalm. When pressure tries to rush your decisions, speak the psalm. When uncertainty tries to steal your peace, speak the psalm. Because alignment always silences anxiety, and anxiety can never survive where trust is practiced consistently. And when alignment replaces anxiety, provision becomes inevitable. A lot of people want provision, but they don't want purpose. They want the results of alignment without the responsibility that comes with it. But God never releases resources without an assignment attached. Provision is not random, it's directional. It follows purpose the same way water follows a channel. When you understand that, money stops being something you chase and starts being something that responds to your obedience. Purpose gives context to prosperity. Without purpose, money becomes a burden, a distraction, or even a destruction. That's why some people get financial opportunities they can't sustain. Increase without assignment creates confusion. But when your finances are connected to what God has called you to do, supply shows up with clarity. You know why it came, how to steward it, and where it belongs. This is why speaking the psalm daily is so powerful. It doesn't just remind you that God provides, it reminds you that God provides with intention. You are not funded to impress people, you are funded to impact them. And when your heart agrees with that, heaven can trust you with more. God invests where there is vision. He multiplies where there is mission. Many people ask God for money when what they really need is direction. They want resources before they understand responsibility. But purpose always precedes provision. God reveals assignment before he releases supply. Because once you know why you're blessed, you won't abuse what you're given. You'll manage it. You'll multiply it. You'll protect it. When your finances are tied to purpose, fear loses its power. You stop worrying about lack because you understand that what God ordered, he must support. If he assigned it, he already planned the provision. That's not optimism, that's principle, and principles don't fail, they function every time. Purpose also simplifies decision making. You no longer ask, can I afford this? You ask, does this align with my assignment? And that one question will save you from countless financial mistakes. Purpose becomes your filter. It tells you what to say yes to and what to walk away from, even if it looks profitable in the moment. The psalm helps anchor your heart in that truth. It shifts your focus from consumption to contribution, from survival to stewardship. You stop viewing money as security and start viewing it as a tool. And tools are meant to be used, not worshiped. God never designed money to be your master. He designed it to be your servant. When you live on purpose, provision becomes predictable, not in timing, but in source. You may not always know how it will come, but you'll know where it comes from. And that confidence produces peace. You're not shaken by temporary shortages because you understand eternal supply. You don't panic when a stream dries up because you're connected to the river. Purpose also protects you from comparison. When you know your assignment, you're not distracted by someone else's success. You're not jealous of their increase because you understand it's funding their calling, not yours. And that frees you to run your race without pressure or envy. God doesn't need you competing, he needs you completing. Here's the truth. God does not fund lifestyles, he funds legacies. He releases resources into hands that are committed to long-term impact. And when your prayers align with that mindset, heaven responds. Not because you asked louder, but because you asked wiser. So as you declare the psalm, let it realign your desires, let it refine your motives, let it remind you that you are not asking for more just to have more, you're asking for more to do more. And when purpose becomes your priority, provision becomes your partner. Because what God originates, he always sustains. A lot of people think of psalms as emotional comfort, something you read when you're hurting or uncertain. But psalms are not just expressions of feeling. They are declarations of covenant. They are reminders of what God has already promised and what he has legally committed himself to perform. When you speak a psalm, you're not asking God to do something new. You're aligning yourself with something eternal, and that alignment activates power. God operates by covenant. A covenant is an agreement backed by his integrity. And when God makes a covenant, he binds himself to his word. That's why scripture says he watches over his word to perform it. Not your opinions, not your complaints, his word. When you speak the psalm, you're putting his word back into the atmosphere, and heaven always responds to its own language. This is why psalms are so effective. They are God-breathed words spoken through human voices. They carry authority because they originated with him. When you declare them, you are not negotiating, you are standing in agreement. You're saying, this is what you said, and I choose to believe it. And belief is the trigger for manifestation. Many people pray from desperation instead of declaration. They beg, plead, and hope something changes. But covenant prayer doesn't beg, it agrees. It doesn't convince God, it positions the believer. When you speak the psalm daily, you're not trying to get God's attention. You're reminding yourself of your access. You're stepping into your covenant rights. Covenant changes the posture of prayer. You stop asking like a stranger and start speaking like a son. You don't approach God as someone hoping to be helped. You approach him as someone who belongs. And belonging produces confidence. Confidence changes how you speak, and how you speak determines what you experience. The psalm reinforces that confidence. It declares that God is your provider, your protector, your sustainer. It establishes boundaries around your life that lack cannot legally cross. When you understand covenant, fear loses its grip because fear thrives on uncertainty. Covenant eliminates uncertainty. It reminds you that God's promises are not subject to the economy, the market, or human systems. They are backed by heaven itself. This is also why consistency matters. Speaking the psalm once may encourage you, but speaking it daily establishes authority. Authority grows through familiarity. The more you live in covenant truth, the more natural faith becomes. You stop wondering if God will come through and start expecting him to. Expectation is not arrogance, it's alignment. Covenant also brings responsibility. It reminds you that blessings are not just received, they are stewarded. When you speak the psalm, you're agreeing not only with God's provision, but with his principles. You're committing to handle increase with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. And God always increases what he can trust. The psalm doesn't just promise supply, it promises protection. It covers your labor, your decisions, your investments. It guards you from loss that comes through foolishness and fear. It doesn't mean you'll never face challenges, but it does mean challenges won't have the final word. Covenant ensures that even setbacks serve a greater purpose. When you understand this, you stop seeing the psalm as routine and start seeing it as reinforcement. Every declaration strengthens your awareness of what belongs to you in God. It sharpens your discernment. It stabilizes your emotions. It keeps you grounded when circumstances fluctuate. So when you speak the psalm, do it with confidence. Do it with understanding. Do it knowing that you are activating promises that cannot fail because they are backed by a God who cannot lie. Because when covenant is remembered, provision is released. Breakthrough is rarely sudden. It's usually cumulative. People look for one moment that changes everything, but most transformations happen because of momentum built quietly over time. Momentum is what happens when small, consistent actions compound into undeniable results. And in the realm of faith and finances, daily declaration is one of the most powerful ways to build that momentum. Every time you speak the psalm, something is moving, even if you can't see it yet. Faith is not idle. It's active beneath the surface. Just like seeds grow in darkness before they break through the soil, declarations work invisibly before they show up visibly. The mistake most people make is quitting before momentum has time to do its work. But consistency turns effort into force. Daily declaration aligns your thinking, your emotions, and your decisions in the same direction. And direction determines destination. When your words are consistent, your choices become clearer. You stop reacting randomly and start responding intentionally. You don't swing between hope and fear, you stabilize. And stability is the foundation of increase. Momentum also changes identity. At first, you may be someone who's just trying to believe, but over time, repetition reshapes how you see yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone waiting for provision and start seeing yourself as someone who expects it. Expectation influences behavior. You begin preparing for opportunities instead of praying for rescue. And preparation attracts provision. This is why daily declaration matters more than occasional intensity. Passion is powerful, but consistency is unstoppable. Anyone can be motivated for a moment, but momentum is built by discipline. And discipline is simply choosing what matters most, especially when you don't feel like it. When you speak the psalm daily, you're practicing spiritual discipline that produces tangible results. Momentum also builds confidence in God's character. The more you declare His promises, the more you recognize His faithfulness. You start noticing patterns of provision that you once overlooked. Small wins become reminders. Doors opening at the right time stop feeling like coincidences and start feeling like confirmations. And that awareness fuels even more faith. Financial momentum works the same way in the natural. One good decision leads to another. One wise choice creates room for the next. And before you know it, you're no longer trying to get out of a hole, you're building something meaningful. Daily declaration keeps you in the mindset required to recognize and sustain that kind of progress. Momentum also protects you from discouragement. When challenges arise, and they will, you don't lose heart as easily. You understand that resistance doesn't mean failure, it often means growth. You're no longer emotionally attached to every setback because you trust the process. And trust keeps you moving forward even when the pace feels slow. What many people don't realize is that God often moves gradually on purpose. Sudden success can expose weak foundations, but momentum strengthens character, patience, and wisdom. It prepares you to handle increase without losing balance. God is not just interested in blessing you, He's interested in preserving you. So when you speak the psalm daily, you're not just making a statement, you're creating a system that reinforces faith, sharpens focus, and aligns your life with divine order. Systems produce results automatically over time, and once momentum is established, it takes less effort to keep moving than it did to start. Eventually, you look back and realize how far you've come. What once felt impossible now feels normal. What once caused fear now causes gratitude. That's the power of daily declaration. It doesn't just change circumstances, it changes you. And when momentum is aligned with faith, breakthrough becomes inevitable.